Grain filler? No grain filler.
Hey everyone, I've got a fun little demo project for you here today. And in this demo, I'm going to show you how to use cabinet mud grain filler to fill the grain on oak and how to get a near sprayed looking finish with just a foam roller. The very first thing I do on any cabinet project is clean the cabinets. And here I'm using Cabinet Prep, which is a degreaser and deglosser that just gets the cabinets ready for that primer. It breaks down any of that grease that's left behind, especially around the stove. And it starts breaking down the old glossy finish so that your primer can bond to the cabinets better. Because it's just a demo door, I decided to wipe it down and try to move things along a little quicker, get it to dry a little faster. And then I'm going to bust out my hand sander with 180 grit sandpaper to start scuffing up that surface so that I've got a perfect surface to start priming. Any little sander will do. I have the Surf Prep 3x4 sander here. It makes really quick work of this type of sanding work. Hand sanding, it works, but it's incredibly slow and tiring. So even just a cheap Black & Decker or something can be absolutely amazing for this. All right, now it's time for the cabinet mud. Cabinet mud is a grain filler that goes on smooth. It sands smooth, it doesn't re-wet, and it's incredibly easy to use. It really fills in that oak graining beautifully, and it's the first step in getting that perfect finish on oak cabinets. I just stir it up until it gets a little bit runnier than peanut butter. You want it kind of thick, but not runny. So I like to go with that peanut butter / pancake batter kind of texture. All right, now that the cabinet mud's all mixed up, you don't need very much, usually just about a scoop like I put on the door right there, and grab a flat mud knife. Here I've got, I believe, a 3-inch or 4-inch, I don't know, somewhere in there, knife, and that one little scoop is all it takes for this door, and I'll actually have excess to put back into my little cup. You see, I forgot for a second that I wanted to keep a third of the door with no grain filler to show a difference, so I started going a little too far. But I'm just going to wipe that off, and it worked out just fine. And then I got smart, and I decided to put a little tape over where I wasn't going to do the grain filler so that I didn't do that again. And I was able to get a nice line showing where the grain was filled and where it wasn't. I'm just pulling off any excess, making sure everything's ready, and that's all there is to it. Put that grain filler on, knife off any excess, and then wait for it to dry. And it's dry. You can see that big color change here, and now I'm just going to grab the 220 grit sandpaper and sand over this quickly. One thing you want to be careful of when sanding the cabinet mud grain filler is not to over sand. You don't want to start sanding the grain filler out of the cabinet. You want to make sure to leave a nice, smooth, flat surface, so don't push too hard and don't get too aggressive with your sanding. Just smooth it out nice and you're good to go. Now it's time to get the primer on, so I'm going to just make sure everything's nice and clean and bust out my primer. I happen to have a quart of Zinsser Smart Prime just sitting in my little shop here. So I figured, why not? We'll go with Zinsser Smart Prime. No special purpose for this, just happened to be the one I had around, so it's the one I'm using. And I have used Smart Prime a lot in the past, and I do like it, so there's a little bit more to it. I think it's a good primer. So, doesn't need too much, and I'm just using a 4-inch mini roller and a 4-inch tray and a 4-inch foam roller pad on that mini roller. And that's going to do most of the work on your cabinets if you're brushing and rolling. Brushing, you might have to do if you have raised panels on that curved portion or on edges of doors. But because I have a nice flat door, I do not have to bust the brush out on this little demo project. If you're doing a project like this, I really got to recommend these little roller covers. They're great. You just throw your roller in them, set it aside, and it keeps them wet for over 24 hours. It's just great. And then target bag for the paint, I guess. And here you can see a close-up of how that non-grain filled side is starting to look. You can't really see it yet, but I promise you, as we build up the coats, you're going to see an amazing difference. Because this first coat of primer is kind of see-through, it's kind of hard to see, but you're going to be amazed by how this looks in the end. So after the first coat of primer is dry, I decided to put on a second coat of primer because rolling primer doesn't put it on as thick as spraying. So if I'm going to brush and roll something, I'm going to do 2 coats of primer and 3 coats top coat. If I'm spraying, I go 1 coat primer, 2 top coats. So here I'm just simply applying the second coat of primer, and what this does is it gives me a thicker build of my primer, which allows me more surface to sand down smooth once the primer is dry. The primer is a little bit thicker, and then I can sand it down more, thus giving me a really smooth surface for the top coat to go onto. And that's the real key. Don't leave your primer too textured or too rough. You want that to be as smooth as possible, and that's going to help you get that perfect looking top coat. So now I'm going up to the 220 grit sandpaper and just going to throw that on my little sander, and I'm going to work it down, but you need to be careful not to sand through the primer. And you're going to see a few areas that start to get a little light, even with 2 coats of primer. So I'm going to start to be careful of those areas, and it's okay that they got a little light, but I don't want to go through and hit the bare wood again. So you can see here, and then just use the feel test. Is all that texture getting knocked down? Are you getting a really smooth surface? If so, then you're ready to move on to the top coat. Here I'm using Emerald Urethane from Sherwin-Williams. Emerald is fantastic for brushing and rolling because it stays wet long enough to let all of that texture settle, and it really smooths out as it's drying. You're going to see a close-up of the finish when it's wet, and it's going to have way more texture to it, and then you're going to see a close-up of when it's dry, and the way it smooths out is just absolutely incredible. It's a beautiful looking finish, and it's incredibly durable. So if you're brushing and rolling your cabinets, I highly recommend Sherwin-Williams Emerald Urethane. I also like Benjamin Moore Advance. I think Advance is absolutely beautiful. It dries a little bit slower, so if you're in a hurry, Emerald maybe, but Advance and Emerald are my 2 go-tos for brushing and rolling. They're also great for spraying, but if you're brushing and rolling, they're perfect. And that's it. Now it's time to just let that first coat dry. All right, and here's a close-up of the first coat of top coat on here. And you can see it's got a little bit of that orange peel in it, but that'll dry out nicely. And over here, you can see the area that doesn't have any cabinet mud grain filler in it. And it's starting to show those deep grain holes more and more with the more coats that I put on. So they're becoming more and more prominent. But look at how smooth that other side is starting to look. What a difference. So the first coat is dry, and now in between top coats, I'm gonna sand with 320 between every top coat. Just a quick sand to knock down any high points so that I can keep that final coat as smooth as possible. One note when you're rolling out your finish, just make sure to put it on as evenly as possible. Sometimes one side of your roller will be a little heavy in paint. You'll get kind of unevenness to your finish. So here you can see I'm going one direction, then I'm going back the other direction, just to make sure everything is rolled on as evenly as possible and there are no lines in my finish. That is a huge key to getting a perfect, near sprayed looking finish when you're done rolling cabinets. And here is the second coat all dried out, and see how nice that finish is starting to look. The left side there with the cabinet mud looks fantastic, and the non-grain filled side over here is really starting to look like there's holes all over in the finish. So that's what a grain filled oak door will look like, and this is what a non-grain filled oak door will look like. And now it's time to put on that final top coat. So again, I'm gonna sand with that 320 grit, and just a quick once over. I don't wanna go through the top coat. I just wanna smooth it out quick before I put on that final coat. Everything's looking good, and it's time to let it dry. So here it is wet, and you can see how that still has a little bit of texture, but look at how little texture there actually is in that for rolling out the cabinet. And that's just putting on that foam roller, nice and smooth, and lots of sanding in between every coat. So the key to getting that really nice smooth finish is fill the grain, sand in between every coat, and sand that primer especially well. And look at how beautiful and smooth that finish looks once it's dry. I would say that that is a near sprayed looking finish, and I would be more than happy with that in my own home. And look at this other side without the grain filler. So if you want a nice smooth cabinet door and you're painting oak, you have to fill the grain. Otherwise, you're gonna get all these little holes and deep graining grooves in your finish. With the grain filler, smooth. Without it, holes and rough. If you want to pick up some cabinet mud grain filler for your painting project, I have a link to it in the description below, or just go to DIYpaintingsupply.com. Grain filler? No grain filler. Hey, real quick before you go, if you're thinking about painting your kitchen cabinets, grab this. This is my free kitchen cabinet project planner. I put this together to help homeowners like you avoid all the big mistakes, like skipping prep, using the wrong tools, or totally underestimating how long this actually takes. It walks you through the whole process, step by step, from cleaning and labeling doors to grain filling, priming, painting, and even reinstallation. I've painted a ton of kitchens, and I use this checklist on every single job. It keeps everything organized. If you want to do your cabinets right the first time and avoid headaches, grab the free planner below. It'll save you hours and probably a few gray hairs. Just click on the link in the description. It's totally free.